Code moves at the speed of thought, scaling across servers and borders in milliseconds. Law, by design, moves at the speed of consensus, grinding through committees, debates, and bureaucratic friction. For the past decade, this mismatch in velocity allowed the technology sector to reshape human interaction with minimal oversight. But that era of unchecked digital expansion has collided with a formidable legislative wall. The European Union has finalized the most ambitious and comprehensive attempt to govern the future of machine intelligence in human history. This is not merely a set of guidelines or voluntary principles. It is a binding legal framework designed to tame an intelligence we are still struggling to fully comprehend. The EU AI Act stands as the world's first comprehensive legal framework for artificial intelligence. Where other nations have offered fragmented policies or sector-specific rules, the European Parliament has engineered a sweeping foundational text. It is a monumental piece of legislation that categorizes, restricts, and in some cases entirely outlaws specific applications of machine learning, fundamentally altering how corporations can deploy algorithmic power. The goal is to create a digital environment where fundamental human rights are protected by default, forcing developers to prove their systems are safe before they are unleashed on the public, rather than apologizing after the damage is done. To understand the gravity of this moment, one must look back at the introduction of the General Data Protection Regulation in 2018. Europe recognized early on that it did not have the domestic technological giants to rival Silicon Valley. However, it possessed something equally powerful: a massive, wealthy consumer market of 450 million people. By leveraging access to this market, the European Union transformed itself into the world's premier digital regulator. The current legislation is a direct evolution of that strategy, applying the same aggressive jurisdictional muscle to the algorithms that process our data and shape our reality. The architecture of this new law is built upon a highly structured, risk-based approach to AI systems. Rather than attempting to regulate the underlying mathematics or the raw computing power, the framework focuses entirely on the specific application of the technology. It organizes artificial intelligence into a rigid pyramid of danger, classifying tools into unacceptable, high, limited, and minimal risk tiers. The severity of the regulation scales linearly with the potential for societal harm, creating a sliding scale of legal responsibility that forces engineers to evaluate the human cost of their code before a single line is executed. At the very top of this pyramid sits the unacceptable risk category, which triggers absolute bans. The legislation draws a hard, non-negotiable line against technologies deemed a clear threat to safety, livelihoods, and democratic rights. This means no social scoring systems that evaluate citizens based on their behavior or socioeconomic status. It means an outright prohibition on cognitive behavioral manipulation, such as voice-activated toys that encourage dangerous behavior in children. It also strictly limits real-time biometric categorization, effectively banning indiscriminate facial recognition surveillance in public spaces by law enforcement, barring a few narrow, highly regulated exceptions. These prohibitions represent a profound philosophical statement about human autonomy. By outlawing these capabilities, regulators are asserting that efficiency and technological progress must never supersede fundamental human dignity. The ban on biometric surveillance in particular strikes at the heart of a growing global debate over privacy, pushing back against the normalization of a world where every face in a crowd is constantly scanned, tracked, and cataloged by the state. Just below the banned tier lies the high-risk category, the zone where the regulatory friction truly intensifies for corporations. This classification captures AI deployed in critical infrastructure, education, employment, essential private services, and the administration of justice. If an algorithm is deciding who gets a mortgage loan, who is selected for a job interview, or how a municipal power grid distributes electricity during a crisis, it is subjected to intense, ongoing scrutiny. These are the invisible systems that dictate the trajectory of human lives, and the legislation demands they be brought out of the black box. Consider the deployment of an automated resume screening tool by a multinational corporation. Under this new legal regime, the company cannot simply purchase the software and turn it on. They must conduct rigorous conformity assessments, proving the system is trained on high-quality representative data to mitigate inherent biases. They must establish detailed logging of the algorithm's decisions, ensure robust cybersecurity measures, and crucially guarantee continuous human oversight. The machine is no longer allowed to have the final, unquestioned say over a human being's livelihood. Descending further down the pyramid, we reach the limited and minimal risk tiers, which encompass the vast majority of consumer applications. Here, the primary weapon of the regulator is transparency. If a user is interacting with a customer service chatbot, the system must clearly state that it is a machine. If an image, audio clip, or video is synthetically generated or manipulated, it must be visibly labeled as a deepfake. The objective is to prevent deception, ensuring that the boundary between human and artificial creation remains visible to the naked eye. However, the pristine structure of this risk pyramid was nearly shattered by a sudden, seismic shift in the technological landscape. Just as the legislation was nearing completion, the explosive arrival of advanced generative AI models sent shockwaves through the tech industry. Lawmakers were forced to scramble, reopening debates to address the unique threats posed by massive foundation models. These general-purpose engines, capable of generating everything from award-winning poetry to complex, functional software code, did not fit neatly into a single risk category because their potential applications were virtually limitless. They were a wild card, a foundational layer of intelligence that could be plugged into 1,000 different downstream applications. The resulting compromise introduced specific, stringent rules for the most powerful generative systems. Developers of high-impact foundation models are now required to maintain extensive technical documentation, comply with European copyright laws, and publish detailed summaries of the content used to train their algorithms. Furthermore, models that exceed certain thresholds of computational power must undergo rigorous adversarial testing to identify systemic risks, such as the potential to generate instructions for biological weapons or execute massive cyber attacks. A crucial question emerges. Why does a regulatory framework drafted in Brussels dictate the behavior of engineers in California or researchers in Beijing? The mechanism driving this global reach is an economic phenomenon known as the Brussels effect. It is the process by which the European Union inadvertently, or perhaps intentionally, globalizes its domestic laws through the sheer gravitational pull of its single market. When a multinational tech giant develops a new artificial intelligence product, the cost of engineering two separate versions, one highly regulated version for Europe and an unregulated version for the rest of the world, is often prohibitively expensive. Managing parallel code bases, dividing data streams, and maintaining distinct compliance teams creates massive logistical nightmares. It is far more efficient and ultimately more profitable to standardize global operations around the strictest regulatory baseline. Through this dynamic, the EU effectively exports its digital values without needing to sign a single international treaty. By dictating the rules of entry to its lucrative market, the legislation forces a global compliance cascade. The AI Act is rapidly becoming the de facto blueprint for ethical AI development, embedding European standards into the architecture of systems deployed in North America, Asia, and beyond. It is a masterclass in regulatory leverage, proving that you do not need to invent the technology to dictate how it is ultimately used by the rest of the planet. This proactive hard law approach stands in stark contrast to the strategies deployed by other global powers. The United States has historically favored a light-touch, market-driven environment. American regulation has largely relied on voluntary commitments from major technology companies and targeted executive orders. The U.S. strategy prioritizes rapid innovation, aggressive venture capital investment, and maintaining a competitive edge, often addressing the negative externalities of technology only after they have manifested in the market. Conversely, China has rapidly implemented its own set of strict algorithmic guidelines. However, the underlying philosophy of the Chinese framework is fundamentally different. While Europe focuses on protecting individual consumer rights and fundamental freedoms, China's regulations are heavily geared toward ensuring that artificial intelligence aligns with state ideology, controls the flow of information, and maintains social stability. The global landscape is fracturing into distinct regulatory spheres, each reflecting the political values of its creators. This divergence creates a complex geopolitical chessboard. The race for technological dominance is no longer just about who can build the fastest supercomputer or train the largest parameter model. It is a battle over policy, impact, and ideological influence. The winning framework will dictate how the global economy integrates machine intelligence, shaping the future of privacy, labor, and truth on a planetary scale. The ultimate success of the European framework will depend entirely on its enforcement. Passing a law is one thing, policing the most complex technology ever created is another. To manage this monumental task, the legislation establishes a centralized AI office armed with unprecedented investigative powers. The financial penalties for non-compliance are severe, designed to command the immediate attention of any corporate board. Violations involving banned applications can result in fines of up to 35 million euros, or 7% of a company's global annual turnover, whichever is higher. Yet a lingering, persistent anxiety haunts the corridors of European tech hubs. Critics argue that this heavy compliance burden will suffocate grassroots innovation. There is a very real fear that by prioritizing safety over speed, Europe is regulating itself out of the artificial intelligence revolution, acting as a strict referee while American and Chinese firms play the actual game. The cost of compliance may prove too high for small startups, inadvertently entrenching the monopoly power of the massive tech titans who can afford armies of lawyers and compliance officers. Despite these valid concerns, the architects of the legislation maintain a steadfast belief that trust is the ultimate currency of the digital age. They are betting that consumers, businesses, and governments will eventually demand technology that is transparent, accountable, and aligned with human values. By proving that highly regulated systems can still drive economic growth, the European Union aims to demonstrate that humanity does not have to surrender its agency to reap the benefits of the algorithmic future. The global reach of this landmark legislation ensures that the rules written today will echo through the code of tomorrow.